We cannot just hand out cash to anyone who walks in here, especially not in an amount this large." The rejection from Melissa Grant, manager of Sterling Bank's Central Branch, rang out loudly enough for every customer and employee to hear. A public humiliation, neatly wrapped in the language of security policy. The woman being denied stood tall, her shoulders steady, her eyes calm, though her heart pounded in her chest. Camille Johnson, 48 years old, wore a plain hoodie and carried a simple handbag with no luxury label. To the crowd, she was just another ordinary black customer, nothing special. Yet her silence, her refusal to bend, only made Melissa more irritated. Behind her, a young teller leaned toward a colleague, whispering just loud enough to carry. "Look at her. She doesn't look like she could possibly have that kind of money." Laughter followed, sharp as any blade. Camille heard every word. She did not flinch, as if the laughter had not touched her. But deep inside, the needles of humiliation pressed into the memories of a woman who had fought her whole life just to stand her ground. The audience in the lobby knew nothing of her past. They did not know that 25 years earlier, Camille had stood behind a counter with a small badge reading teller trainee, serving customers with a tired smile. They did not know about the nights she stayed awake, finishing loan files, climbing step by step from teller to loan officer, from branch manager to regional director. They did not know the battles she fought to earn an MBA scholarship, the bitterness she swallowed watching less capable colleagues promoted simply because of the color of their skin. And they certainly did not know that the woman they mocked was the newly appointed CEO of Sterling Bank, just 3 months into her role, the first black woman to ever lead the institution. In the corner, a young security guard hesitated. He followed the orders of his manager, but his eyes kept drifting toward Camille. In that moment, he sensed something different about her, a poise untouched by fear, words short but confident, eyes sharper than any customer he had ever seen. He could not explain it, only knew he wanted to believe her. Melissa, on the other hand, felt her power rise. She was used to standing above, deciding who was worthy and who was not. Her gaze at Camille was not that of a banker toward a client, but of a gatekeeper toward an intruder. "Not suitable for someone like you," Melissa said firmly, loud enough for all to hear. Around her, staff members including Mark Lewis, a veteran teller in his 30s, and Richard Hale, a support clerk, smirked knowingly. To them, this scene was nothing unusual. They were sure this was just another black woman out of place, someone who did not belong in the polished world of banking. Camille slowly placed her bank card and identification on the counter. Her voice was steady. "I just want to withdraw money from my own account. I have all the necessary documents." Melissa sneered, leaning closer, lowering her tone but ensuring the disdain still carried. "Perhaps you would be better suited at the check, cashing place down the street. Here, we serve high-class clients." Another blade, driven straight at her dignity. A few customers gasped audibly. One middle-aged man muttered, "Why is she still standing here? Just leave so we can get on with our business." Inside, Camille wanted to shout. She wanted to expose the injustice, to tear down the wall of prejudice built into every stair around her. But she held it in, because this was not the first time, and it would not be the last. But this time, she had a plan. Quietly, she pulled a phone from her simple handbag. The staff who saw it burst into mocking laughter. Richard nudged Mark. "Look at that. She's probably calling some fake lawyer." None of them knew that one phone call could end their entire careers. Camille raised the phone to her ear. Her voice came calm, but decisive. "Hello. This is Camille Johnson. I am at the Central Branch. They have just refused my transaction." In that moment, the onlookers still believed she was just another powerless customer, pleading for help. But on the other end of the line, Diane Porter, Chief Operating Officer of the bank, shot up from her chair, her face draining of color at the sound of the familiar voice of her CEO. A flash of lightning had struck in what seemed like a calm storm. Camille lowered the phone, her expression steady, her posture unshaken. Around her, the air grew so tight that every tick of the wall clock pounded like a drum. Melissa still believed she held control. Richard and Mark still chuckled. Customers still thought they were right to doubt this woman. They knew nothing. All they saw was a modestly dressed woman, humiliated in public. But in just a few minutes, they would be brought to their knees before her true identity. In the thick air of scorn and suspicion, Camille stood there, quiet as ice, yet inside a storm raged. And the name she had spoken into that phone had already planted seeds of doubt in the minds of those who thought they held the power. That storm was about to sweep away every pretense, every mask, and they still had no idea. 25 years ago, on an autumn morning, Camille Johnson stood behind the teller counter, her hair neatly tied back, a small name badge pinned to her uniform. The words teller trainee seemed to tremble with each breath of the young woman. Each time a customer approached, their eyes slid past her without pause, as if Camille were just another fixture of the bank, nothing more. No one knew that the slender young woman was working 3 other jobs just to cover tuition. By day, she wore her bank uniform. By night, she waited tables at a diner, scrubbed floors at a grocery store, and stayed up late cleaning guest rooms for travelers. In her calloused hands, Camille carried a quiet ambition: to be respected for her ability, not dismissed for her appearance. Once a middle-aged customer tossed a stack of papers onto the counter and barked, "Are you sure you can even read the numbers on this?" Camille lifted her head, offering a faint smile, swallowing the sting that would still ache years later. She did not argue. She simply focused on getting every detail right, determined to prove that contempt could never define her worth. From the lowest rung, Camille began her climb. She became a loan officer, then a branch manager, then a regional director. Every step forward came not just from sharp intellect, but from endurance carved out of struggle. She had been denied opportunities for being not the right image for the brand. She had watched colleagues with lighter skin and less experience get promoted over her, simply because they looked more trustworthy to big clients. But Camille did not break. She stored every wound and turned it into fuel. In her early 30s, Camille worked full-time while pursuing an MBA at Stanford. She carried books in her bag, studying on the train, scribbling notes during lunch breaks. At night, in a small room that smelled of cheap coffee, she sat before an old laptop, typing her thesis on risk management. The pressure was immense, but to Camille, it was just another staircase she had to climb if she wanted to shatter the invisible glass ceiling that had always loomed over women of color in finance. During her final defense, one professor whispered to another, She's not just brilliant, she's relentless. In the decade that followed, Camille proved him right. She turned 3 failing branches into success stories. Quarterly reports under her leadership recorded record profits. In the industry, people began to call her by a new name, the Fixer. When she became COO, skeptics muttered, "She can only go so far, then she'll hit the ceiling." But Camille did not hit it. She broke it. 3 months ago, when the former SAC announced his retirement, the board split into factions. On the table, Camille's portfolio was stacked with achievements, 2 decades of service, credibility beyond question. But in closed rooms, whispers spread. Will major clients be comfortable with a black woman as CEO? The question had nothing to do with ability. It was prejudice disguised as business concern. It nearly barred her from the highest seat. The vote was tense, glances sharp, pens tapping nervously on the table. When the result came, the majority chose Camille. The room fell silent for a moment. A new era had begun. In her inauguration speech, Camille stood beneath bright lights, her deep voice echoing across the hall. "I will ensure that every customer, every employee, and every community we serve is treated with dignity and fairness. No exceptions." Thousands of hands erupted in applause. The press called it historic. But inside, Camille knew her words would mean nothing if not tested on the front lines. The glowing numbers in the reports hid a truth. Customers of color, immigrant clients, low-income families. They were leaving Sterling Bank more than anyone else. The reasons rarely became formal complaints. They were hidden in cold stares, unnecessary questions, unreasonable delays. Quiet injustices, enough to drive people away. Camille understood. To know the truth, she had to feel it in her own skin. And so the undercover plan was born. No television crews, no PR team. Just a middle-aged woman in a cheap hoodie and a baseball cap walking into a gleaming branch as an anonymous client. And now, standing in the marble, flawed lobby, being scorned openly by Melissa Grant, Camille realized that everything she had endured in the past was happening all over again. But this time, the stage was different. This time, she was not a trainee. This time, she was the CEO. In Melissa's disdainful stare, in Mark and Richard's mocking laughter, Camille stood like a reflection of the young woman once dismissed behind the counter. But now, the game had changed. The woman they thought was just an unworthy black customer was the one who held their futures in her hands. That moment of revelation was approaching fast, like a flame waiting to ignite in the suffocating air of that lobby. 9:15 in the morning. The glass doors of Sterling Bank closed slowly behind Camille Johnson. She chose a seat in the waiting area, eyes fixed on her phone like a busy customer. But in truth, every sense was sharpened, listening, observing, recording. Less than 3 minutes later, a white businessman in a navy suit entered. Before he even reached the counter, an employee rushed forward, smile stretched so wide it looked forced. "Good morning, sir. How may I help you today?" Camille raised an eyebrow. The man was ushered straight into the VIP consultation desk. No waiting for a number, no standing in line. Just a handshake, a few polite words, and the entire lobby seemed to bow to his presence. 5 minutes later, an elderly Asian couple shuffled in, their hands full of paper bags, eyes gentle as they searched for the counter. No one greeted them. A teller simply pointed coldly toward the chairs. "Take a number and wait." No smile, no welcome. Camille noticed the wife's quiet frown, the hesitant bow of the husband's head as he pulled a ticket from the machine. She felt the weight of the moment, the familiar invisibility carried daily by so many minority communities. Then came a young white woman, blonde hair falling over her shoulders, wearing a casual blouse and carrying a tote bag. She stepped up to the quick service counter with a polite smile. Instantly, the teller leaned forward warmly. "How was your weekend? Did you go anywhere fun?" The transaction finished in under 2 minutes. Camille saw the ease in the teller's eyes, the comfort of unearned familiarity, the automatic trust. Moments later, a Latino man entered, his work clothes stained with plaster dust, his shoes worn thin. He approached the same counter that had just welcomed the young woman. But this time, the smile was gone. The teller's voice was flat. "We need additional verification. Can you provide a passport or utility bill?" The man frowned and searched his pockets. All he had was an ID card and his employee badge from a cleaning company. The teller gave them a quick glance, suspicion flashing across her eyes, then typed slowly on the keyboard. A 10-minute ordeal followed, just to cash a small check. Camille felt her chest tighten. Everything was too clear, too raw. Discrimination did not live in policy. It lived in the selective warmth of a smile, in the suspicion of a stare. Over the next 30 minutes, the pattern repeated 6 times. White customers, fast, smooth, friendly. Minority customers, slow, questioned, dismissed. Camille waited, memorizing every detail. 30. 7 minutes passed. 3 white customers who had arrived after her were served and gone. She remained, sitting like a shadow forgotten in plain sight. At last, her number flashed on the screen. Camille stepped to counter 4. The teller, Emily Ross, looked up, her smile fading instantly. "How can I help you?" Her voice was flat, stripped of the warmth she had offered minutes earlier. Camille placed her documents and withdrawal slip on the glass counter. "I want to withdraw funds." The amount written on the slip, $115,000. Emily's eyes widened. Her hands froze over the keyboard. Her gaze darted from the paperwork to Camille's face, then back to the paperwork, as if searching for a mistake. "This is quite a large amount." Her voice rose a pitch, loud enough for her colleague at the next counter to hear. Camille answered calmly, "Yes, but it is fully within the permitted balance of the account." Emily did not respond. Instead, she leaned toward Mark Lewis, the veteran teller at the next counter. Mark glanced over, smirked, then stood, his tall frame casting a shadow. "Is there a problem here?" His voice carried just enough to make the lobby turn. Customers began whispering. An elderly woman clutched her purse tighter, stepping back. To them, Camille suddenly looked suspicious, simply because she dared to withdraw her own money. Camille drew a deep breath. Her heart raced, but her voice stayed slow and steady. "There is no problem. I am simply conducting a withdrawal." Mark picked up her documents, holding them under the light as if he were an officer, checking evidence. "Lately, there have been unusual cases with accounts like this. We need to be more cautious." "What kind of accounts?" Camille asked, her eyes calm but sharp. Mark ignored her and turned to Emily. "Check the transaction history. Look for irregularities." At that moment, Richard Hale stepped forward, his whisper just loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "Could be money laundering or a forged check." A mocking smile spread across his lips, his eyes flicking from Camille's natural hair to her plain hoodie, as if her appearance alone was evidence enough. "We just need to confirm the money actually belongs to you," Richard said, his syrupy tone dripping with false courtesy. Camille straightened, her voice low, but cutting through the air like steel. "I have provided my card, my documents, and my account. I have been a customer of Sterling Bank for years. I demand this transaction be completed now." The air grew heavier. Whispers rippled. No one saw a legitimate client. They saw only a black woman daring to withdraw a large sum, and they believed they had the power to deny her. They did not realize their arrogance was pushing them straight toward the moment they would lose everything. The sound of heels struck the marble floor, each step sharp as a summons. Melissa Grant, manager of Sterling Bank's Central Branch, emerged from her glass office, her frame neat in a charcoal gray suit, blonde hair styled in soft waves, eyes cold as if she held absolute power over the lobby. No introduction, no request for a name. Melissa walked straight to counter 4, where Camille Johnson stood. Her face wore the mask of concern, but her eyes glittered with disdain. "Madam, I hear there has been some trouble with your withdrawal request." Her voice was smooth, but the falseness clung to it. Camille met her gaze. "There is no trouble. I am simply withdrawing money from my own account." Melissa's smile stiffened, her lips curving, but her eyes narrowing like blades. $115,000 is a substantial withdrawal. May I ask, what is the purpose of this money? The question fell cold, like a bolt sliding into place. The remaining customers in the lobby looked up, eyes curious, intrusive. Camille understood. This was not a procedural question. It was a silent verdict. That very morning, she had seen at least 3 white customers withdraw similar sums without a single question. One was wished a pleasant day. Another offered additional VIP services. None were asked to explain. But for her, a black woman in a hoodie, the amount suddenly became unacceptable. Melissa glanced quickly down at the papers, then delivered words that cut like ice water. "Mrs. Johnson, this amount does not seem appropriate for someone like you. Here, we serve a certain class of clientele. I am afraid you are not among them." The air in the lobby froze. A young woman at a nearby counter covered her mouth in shock. A middle-aged man stifled a mocking laugh. Richard Hale, standing close, could not hide his smug satisfaction. He chimed in, "Or perhaps you recently received a settlement. Or maybe were lucky enough to inherit something." The way he lingered on the words turned the question into a blatant insult. Camille drew a deep breath. Part of her longed to respond, to lay bare the truth that one stroke of her pen could end their careers. But another part, the part forged through decades of enduring scorn, chose stillness, to let them reveal themselves. In Melissa's mind, confidence swelled. She had seen hundreds of customers like this, people scrutinized until shame forced them to walk away. She was certain this time would be no different. "Perhaps," Melissa lowered her voice, feigning discretion, but ensuring the entire lobby could hear. "You would feel more comfortable at the check, cashing store down the street. They are used to handling transactions like yours." A murmur spread through the room, like wind through dry branches. Some customers pretended to busy themselves with papers, but their eyes stayed fixed on the scene. Camille lifted her head toward the security camera mounted high in the corner. A flash of light caught in her eyes. She knew everything was being recorded. "Madam," Camille said, her voice so steady it startled both Melissa and Richard, "I have provided my documents, my bank card, and the right to withdraw from my account. I request that this transaction be completed immediately." For a moment, silence hung. Then Melissa's expression hardened into a smirk. Her hand flicked a signal to security. "This woman is causing a disturbance. If necessary, escort her out." The young guard, Thomas, barely in his 20s with a face still boyish, stepped forward hesitantly. His eyes darted from Melissa to Camille. Something in the woman's calm presence made him falter. Camille no longer looked at Melissa. She reached into her handbag, her movements steady, deliberate. The lobby held its breath. "Excuse me, just a moment," she said crisply, then dialed a number. Mark and Richard exchanged looks and laughed under their breath. Richard muttered, "Look at her. Probably calling some cheap lawyer or a friend to put pressure." Their laughter echoed, but choked off as Camille spoke into the phone, her words striking the marble floor like hammers. "Hello, this is Camille Johnson. I am at the Central Branch. They have just refused my transaction." That name, Camille Johnson, passed over the ears of customers without meaning. But in an office just blocks away, inside Sterling Bank's headquarters, Diane Porter, Chief Operating Officer, shot upright at her desk, her face draining of color, her heart pounding. "My God," Diane whispered, "that's the CEO." In an instant, the woman publicly humiliated as a customer became the center of a storm that would shake the entire bank. In the branch lobby, Melissa still smiled, convinced she had put a lesser customer in her place. But at headquarters, security monitors were already replaying the footage, enlarging the frames and streaming them straight to the boardroom. The game had changed, and the arrogant few in that lobby had no idea. They had just dug the grave for their own careers. 20th floor, Sterling Bank headquarters. A vast boardroom with glass walls overlooking the sunlit skyline had suddenly turned into a silent battlefield. A massive security screen showed the Central Branch in real time. Camille Johnson standing calm at the counter, while Melissa Grant crossed her arms, smirking. Around her, Mark Lewis and Richard Hale whispered with mocking laughter. Diane Porter, Chief Operating Officer, shot to her feet, her face pale. She had worked with Camille for over a decade, weathered crises together, witnessed the extraordinary strength of will that defined this black CEO. Now Diane could hardly believe it. The leader she respected most was being publicly humiliated inside their own bank. Board Chairman Jonathan Prescott, 60-2, his silver hair gleaming under the lights, slammed the table. "Stop this right now. Zoom the camera. Give me the audio." From the speakers, Melissa's voice rang cold and deliberate. "Here, we serve a different class of clientele. I am afraid you are not among them." In the boardroom, A younger member shook his head and whispered, "My God, they are discriminating against their own CEO." No one answered. No one breathed. Every eye was fixed on the screen, where raw truth unfolded. Diane turned sharply to security. "I want the full footage from the moment she entered the branch. Every frame. Time stamped." Technicians typed furiously. On the giant screen, clips appeared side by side. A white businessman welcomed at the door, escorted into VIP. An elderly Asian couple ignored, dismissed with a wave. A blonde young woman greeted warmly. A Latino worker scrutinized over every document. And finally, Camille, in a navy hoodie, forced to wait nearly 40 minutes before being called. The full picture was clear, undeniable. "Dear God," board member Catherine Reynolds whispered. "How many customers have endured this while we looked away?" Jonathan Prescott gripped his pen, his voice like a hiss through his teeth. "No, it is not that we did not know. It is that we chose not to see." The room grew heavy, like stone pressing down. Meanwhile, at the branch, tensions mounted. Melissa stood with arms folded, eyes frozen. Richard and Mark flanked her like loyal guards. A few customers pulled out their phones, secretly recording. Camille stood tall, her eyes calm but blazing deep within. She knew there was no need to shout, no need to argue. All she had to do was stand, and the system would indict itself. Melissa signaled to security. "Remove this woman. She is causing a disturbance." Young guard Thomas, barely past 20, stepped forward, his face uneasy. His eyes flicked between Melissa and Camille. He hesitated, as if his very conscience cried, "This is wrong." Back in the boardroom, Diane's fist struck the table. "Call legal. I want attorneys at that branch in 15 minutes. And prepare the personnel files for Melissa, Mark, Richard. Every complaint, every review, every internal email. Bring me everything." An assistant scrambled out of the room. Jonathan turned to the tech team. "Record every word. Every insult will be evidence." The screen zoomed on Melissa's face as she leaned down, her voice sharp yet caught by the security microphone, echoing through the boardroom. "Perhaps you should try the check. Cashing store. They are used to serving customers like you." The words slashed at the bank's dignity. Board members turned away, ashamed to meet each other's eyes. In that instant, Diane felt the truth crystallizing. This was not a single branch's failure. This was a mirror exposing the sickness of the entire system. And Camille, through her powerful silence, was forcing them to face it. "My God," Catherine whispered. "Camille planned this. This is no accident." Jonathan nodded slowly. "She is using her own experience to expose what reports never reveal. And we are about to witness a storm." At the branch, Melissa lifted her chin, still convinced she held control. Camille raised her phone again, her voice clear. "Yes, I am still here. They have refused my transaction, and now they are calling security." On the other end, Diane Porter gripped her phone, her words sharp. "Camille, I am on my way. Do not move." On one side, the suffocating lobby filled with smirks and scorn. On the other, a boardroom high above the city where leaders sat frozen before the truth. Two worlds were about to collide. Melissa still believed she had the authority to dismiss an unfit customer, But within minutes, the branch doors would open, and everyone would learn that the woman they humiliated was none other than their CEO. The first sound was not a voice, but the chime of the bank's elevator. Ding! The metal doors slid open, revealing a group striding into the central branch of Sterling Bank. Leading them was Diane Porter, Chief Operating Officer, her heels striking the marble floor in steady rhythm. A navy suit hugged her frame, her eyes sharp as they swept across the room. Behind her came 2 assistants and an attorney, all moving quickly, their expressions tight as drawn wire. The lobby froze. Employees who had been feigning busyness stopped mid-typing. Customers who had been whispering lowered their heads, hearts racing. Melissa Grant, the branch manager, stiffened, then forced a polite smile. She smoothed her hair, tugged her jacket into place, and stepped forward as if to welcome. "Oh, Diane, what a surprise to see you here without notice. What brings—" Diane cut her off, her voice cold as steel. "Enough. Step aside." Melissa faltered, her smile stiffening. For the first time in years of managing, she felt power slipping away. Diane walked straight to the counter, where Camille Johnson still stood, calm, upright, her deep eyes glowing with resolve. Diane stopped, drew a breath, then bowed her head slightly to Camille. Her voice rang clear across the lobby. "I deeply apologize, especially that this happened here at our central branch." The words thundered like a storm. Employees glanced at each other in shock. Melissa blinked rapidly, her composure unraveling. Richard and Mark froze, the blood draining from their faces. Diane turned, addressing the entire staff. "Do you even know who she is?" Her tone cut like a verdict. Silence. "This is Camille Johnson, CEO of Sterling Bank, the highest authority in this entire system. Your direct superior." The lobby erupted in stunned silence, so deep that every breath sounded like a gust of wind. Melissa staggered half a step back, her face flushing red, then paling to white. Richard swallowed hard, eyes wide in disbelief. Mark bowed his head, sweat beading on his forehead. Customers gaped, a hushed voice escaping from an elderly woman. "My God, the CEO." A young man lifted his phone, recording, determined to capture history in the making. Young guard Thomas exhaled in relief. His instinct had been right. This woman was no ordinary customer. Melissa tried to salvage her ground, her voice trembling. This must be a misunderstanding. We were only trying to ensure transaction security. We never meant." Diane raised her hand, silencing her. "Enough. We have watched the full footage. We have heard every word you spoke. Not just today, but the way you treated other customers all morning. The bias is blatant, shameless, undeniable." In Diane's hand, a tablet screen lit up, showing recordings. A white client withdrawing $120,000 in 5 minutes, smiling and chatting. Cut to footage of a customer of color waiting 40 minutes for the same transaction, scrutinized over documents. The room fell silent, except for the clicking as each clip played. Camille stood tall, her eyes fixed on the 3 of them. Melissa, Mark, Richard. In that moment, she was no longer a humiliated customer. She was the CEO, holding absolute authority. "You have revealed yourselves," Camille said, her voice low but echoing. "Your arrogance has disgraced Sterling Bank. And the worst part is that you thought you would get away with it." Melissa opened her mouth to protest, but her throat locked. Eyes from customers, colleagues, even young Thomas the guard bore down on her. For the first time, she was the one being judged. Diane turned to Camille, her gaze filled with respect. "Camille, how do you want me to proceed?" Camille turned slowly, her voice firm, resolute. "Melissa Grant, Mark Lewis, Richard Hale, you are terminated immediately. Your behavior has no place in this bank." 3 sharp intakes of breath sounded at once. Melissa drained of color, her hand gripping the counter for support. Mark stood frozen, then staggered a step. Richard stammered, No, this can't be." The lobby held its breath. Some customers exchanged furtive nods, as though justice had been restored. Camille continued, her tone calm, steady. "Thomas, escort them out. They will have time to collect their belongings. Their staff cards are revoked, their internal accounts frozen. I do not want to see them in this branch again." The young guard nodded firmly, this time with conviction. In less than 10 minutes, the balance of power had flipped entirely. From a customer mocked, Camille now stood with ultimate authority. Melissa, once the queen of the branch, now faltered like a disgraced pretender. Mark and Richard, once eager accomplices, now trembled under the eyes of colleagues and clients. And Camille, calm, dignified, without gloating, knew this was not a personal victory. It was the first step in changing a rotten culture. The glass doors closed behind Melissa, Mark, and Richard. The heavy echo of their footsteps lingered in the vast bank lobby. A few customers whispered, others kept their phones raised, still recording, determined not to miss this historic moment. 3 arrogant employees fired on the spot in front of everyone. The lobby was silent. Every eye turned to Camille Johnson. She stood tall, her face calm, her eyes blazing, carrying both the weight of a woman who had endured years of scorn and the presence of a leader. Camille let her gaze travel across the room. Dozens of employees stood behind the counters, their faces stiff. Some bowed their heads, ashamed to meet her eyes. Others looked at her with trembling stares, as if bracing for judgment. She drew a deep breath and spoke, each word clear, echoing across the space. "What you have just witnessed today is not simply the dismissal of 3 individuals. It is a mirror reflecting the rotten culture festering inside this branch." The words made several employees flinch. A woman at counter 6 clenched her fists, her lips pressed white. A young trainee shuddered, recalling the times he had watched minority customers treated differently while he stayed silent. Camille's voice was steady, sharp. "Sterling Bank does not exist to serve a chosen class of clients. Our mission is to serve everyone, old or young, white or black, wealthy or working class. All deserve respect. If you forget that, you have forgotten the very reason this bank was founded." A wave of silence rippled through the lobby. Some employees lowered their heads, shoulders trembling. Camille's eyes stopped on a young face. Emily Ross, the teller who had directly handled her withdrawal request. The 24-year-old stood frozen, her hands clenched, her lips quivering. Camille walked toward her. The slow echo of her heels made Emily's tension grow unbearable. When only an arm's length remained, Camille stopped, looking directly into her tear-filled eyes. Emily whispered, barely audible. I'm sorry. I knew it was wrong. But I didn't know what to do under their pressure. Tears streamed down her young cheeks. The entire lobby was still, ears straining for every word. Camille's tone softened, but her resolve remained. Emily, you were wrong to stay silent, wrong to let yourself be swept along. But I see something else in you, remorse. You knew it was unjust, and your heart reacted. That regret is your chance to change. Emily's eyes widened, confused. But I didn't protect you. I stood by. Camille rested a hand lightly on the counter, her voice warm yet firm. What matters is not how many times you've fallen, but whether you have the courage to stand up and move in the right direction now. Change begins with the young, with those who admit their mistakes and commit to correcting them. The entire lobby watched, pulled into the exchange. These words were not just for Emily, but for everyone, every employee who had once stayed silent in the face of injustice. Camille turned back to the team, her voice rising strong, commanding. I do not need employees who only serve customers that look worthy. I need people who understand that every person is worthy. If you think Sterling Bank is a place to discriminate, leave now. But if you are ready to change, this is the beginning. A few employees lifted their heads, their eyes flickering with resolve. A middle-aged man nodded firmly, his eyes glistening. The room, once heavy with fear, began to shift toward awakening. Emily wept, but now it was not fear. It was release. I want to start again. I will not stay silent any more. Camille nodded, the corner of her lips lifting slightly, not in triumph, but in trust. Then prove it with your actions. Begin today, Emily. The atmosphere shifted. The suffocating silence transformed into a wave of awareness. Fearful eyes now shone with determination. Camille had not only unmasked the guilty, she had planted a seed, the seed of change. In that moment, Emily was no longer just a trembling young teller. She became a small symbol of redemption, and a promise that from this day forward, the bank would be reborn from within. The atmosphere in this bank lobby had shifted. From the heavy air of fear and humiliation, there was now a tense silence, filled with anticipation. Employees stood in a wide circle. Customers waiting in their seats did not leave. All eyes fixed on Camille Johnson, the woman who had overturned the game with nothing but calmness and quiet authority. Camille let her gaze linger on Emily Ross, the young teller who had just broken down in tears of regret. The reflection of light in those tear-filled eyes reminded Camille of herself at that same age, naive, clumsy, but carrying a burning desire to prove her worth. She drew a deep breath and spoke slowly, her voice ringing out like a bell. Emily, I do not believe change begins with those who have grown hardened in their mistakes. Change begins with the young, with those who can admit they were wrong, face it, and choose to rise. Emily looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. But I'm only a trainee teller. I don't have what it takes to lead anyone. A faint smile touched Camille's lips, not mocking, but full of trust. Ability does not come only from a title. It comes from courage. And today, when you admitted before everyone here that you were wrong, that is the beginning of a leader. The lobby fell silent again. Employees exchanged glances, their eyes widening as if they could not believe what they were about to hear. Camille turned to face the entire staff. From this moment forward, Emily Ross will be appointed interim branch manager. She will receive training, support, and close supervision. But more importantly, she will stand as proof that true change can begin from within. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room like a sudden tide. Some employees stared wide-eyed. Some covered their mouths in shock. An elderly customer in the waiting area nodded slowly with a smile. Emily stood stunned, her lips trembling. No, this can't be. I'm not ready. I'll fail." Camille stepped closer, her voice lowering but firm. No one steps into leadership feeling completely ready. I wasn't either. What matters is this. Are you ready to learn? And are you ready to put fairness above everything else? Emily swallowed hard, tears spilling again, but this time from emotion rather than fear. Yes, I'm ready. Diane Porter, standing nearby, gave a small nod. She understood Camille's decision, to plant a seed instead of simply punishing, a seed that could grow into a pillar of strength in the future. Camille turned back to the team, her gaze sweeping across the room. This is not a reward. This is a responsibility. Emily will need the cooperation of all of you. From today, the culture of this branch will change, and it will begin with treating every customer the same, no exceptions. A middle-aged employee, silent all morning, stepped forward half a pace, his voice catching. "Madam CEO, I am sorry. I too have seen things like this happen many times. But I did not dare to speak." Camille looked at him, her eyes softening. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity. But today, you chose to speak. That, too, is a beginning. Her words washed over the group like cool water over parched ground. A new breeze stirred, carrying the sense that something real was beginning to change. Emily stood behind the counter, her hands still trembling, but her eyes transformed, no longer filled with fear alone, but with the light of determination. She nodded faintly, as if making a promise to herself. Never again would she let silence kill her conscience. Camille leaned slightly toward Diane and spoke low, but firm. She will make mistakes, but it is those mistakes that will teach her to grow. And what I want this branch to understand is one message. Fairness begins with the courage to change. Diane allowed herself a small smile, the first all morning. That is your way, to turn a moment of crisis into a lesson for survival. As everyone's eyes turned to Emily, the trembling young teller was no longer just a frightened employee. She had become a symbol of change, small but powerful. Camille had not only dismissed the guilty, she had sown the belief that every mistake could become an opportunity if one had the courage to face it and rise. The bank lobby, once heavy and stifling, now glowed, not from the lights above, but from a new spark of hope that had been lit. 3 days after the shocking incident at the Central Branch, the light of dozens of television cameras flooded the podium inside Sterling Bank's grand auditorium. Behind it, the bank's logo gleamed across a backdrop with bold golden words, Equitable Banking Initiative. The hall was packed with reporters, financial analysts, long-time customers, and members of communities that had long spoken out about unfair treatment in banking. The air was thick with anticipation. Whispers filled the room. What will she say? Is this just a PR stunt to calm the outrage? Then the doors opened. Camille Johnson stepped out. She wore a sleek black suit, her hair neatly tied back, her face calm but her eyes blazing. No longer was she the woman in a hoodie humiliated at a teller's desk. Before the cameras and millions of viewers, she stood like an unshakable mountain. Camille stopped behind the podium, her hand resting lightly on the microphone, letting a few seconds of silence pass. Then her voice rose, slow, steady, and resonant, capturing every heart in the room. 3 days ago, at the central branch of Sterling Bank, I was denied the right to complete a lawful transaction. I was asked questions that no other customer was asked. I was told perhaps I should leave and try a check, cashing store down the street, because I did not fit. The hall erupted in murmurs, cameras flashing in rapid succession. But Camille pressed on. I am not sharing this story for sympathy. I am sharing it so everyone understands. If the CEO of this bank can be treated this way, then how many ordinary customers have already endured the same? How many walked away quietly, carrying wounds in their hearts and broken trust? A hush fell. In the front rows, a few guests lowered their heads, shoulders trembling. Camille lifted her chin, her voice gaining force, each sentence like a hammer strike. We cannot call ourselves a community bank if we choose which communities to respect and which to discard. She raised a thick folder high, then placed it firmly on the podium. Today, I officially announce the Equitable Banking Initiative, a $50 million commitment. This is not a publicity stunt. This is a plan for true reform. On the giant screen behind her, words appeared in bold. Anti. Discrimination, training for all employees, incentives and penalties tied directly to fairness metrics. Anonymous surveys and demographic-based data analysis to uncover disparities. An equitable customer council, composed of those who once faced discrimination, empowered to oversee policies. The clattering of keyboards filled the air. Journalists rushed to capture every detail, live streams broadcasting in real time. Camille lifted her hand, inviting several people in the front row to stand. Allow me to introduce Mr. Michael Mandel, businesswoman Elena Rodriguez, and Mr. James Chen. Each of them has faced unfair treatment at Sterling Bank. And today, they are not here as victims. They are here as watchdogs, as voices to ensure that we truly change. Cameras panned across them. Michael's lips pressed tight, pride shining in his eyes. Elena nodded, tears glimmering. James bowed slightly to the audience and was met with thunderous applause. Camille lowered her tone, but her words cut deeper. Discrimination is not only morally wrong, it is also an enormous waste. When we dismiss customers of color, immigrants, or working class communities, we are discarding entrepreneurs brimming with potential, families striving to build their future, dreams that should have been nurtured. Her voice rose with emotion, her eyes burning. This bank will miss no more." The hall erupted with applause. A few reporters even stood, cameras shaking as they captured the moment through their own emotion. In the front row, Diane Porter allowed herself a faint smile. She understood this was not just a press conference. This was the birth of a cultural revolution, a battle to make Sterling Bank the bank of everyone. Camille ended with a voice deep, steady, and full of resolve. "I promise every customer watching this today, if you ever feel you have been treated unfairly, call the hotline printed behind every teller station. That line goes directly to the CEO's office, to me, and I will listen." The entire auditorium rose, applause roaring like thunder. In that moment, Camille was more than a CEO. She was the embodiment of justice, of steadfast will, of the belief that change was possible. From humiliation at a teller's counter, she had forged a firestorm of reform across the system. And now, before millions of eyes, she planted the truth that fairness is not a privilege. It is a fundamental right every customer deserves. The story was not over, because the real test would not be in this press conference. The real test would begin tomorrow, when every branch, every employee, and every transaction decision would have to live up to this spirit of fairness. 6 months later, a crisp autumn morning, the wind stirred gently through the trees along the street. Crowds of people hurried to work, coffee in hand, eyes fixed on their phones. At the corner where glass towers mirrored the sky, the revolving doors of Sterling Bank opened once again. Stepping into the bright, polished space was a woman in a simple coat, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. No one in the lobby realized it was Camille Johnson, the CEO of the bank. Once again, she had gone undercover. But this time, her purpose was not to expose injustice. It was to see whether the seeds she had planted had truly begun to grow. Camille chose a seat in the waiting area. Her heart beat faster, not from fear of being humiliated, but with the nervous anticipation of a teacher waiting to see if her students would pass their final test. Only minutes later, a Latino man entered, his work boots still dusted with plaster. A young employee stepped forward immediately, smiling warmly. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" Camille's hand tightened slightly. 6 months ago, a man just like him had been scrutinized, interrogated about his documents. Today, he was greeted with a genuine smile. An elderly Asian woman followed, her hair white as snow, hands trembling as she clutched a stack of disorganized papers. Instantly, a female staff member walked out, bent slightly, and spoke gently. "Let me help you organize those, ma'am. Please sit down and rest." The sight made Camille's eyes sting. She remembered all too well the dreadful morning when an elderly Asian couple had been coldly pointed to the chairs, treated as though they were invisible. Now that simple courtesy had become the norm. Camille rose and walked to the quick service counter. Behind it stood Emily Ross, no longer the trembling young teller she had been 6 months earlier. On her chest gleamed a new nameplate. Branch Manager, Interim. Emily looked up and smiled. "Hello. How may I help you today?" Camille hesitated for a brief moment. That smile was no longer nervous, no longer mixed with fear. It was the confident smile of someone who had grown through the storm. Camille deliberately made a request. "I'd like to withdraw a rather large amount." Emily took the documents, her eyes flicking quickly over the computer screen. She looked up, her voice firm, yet never cold. "This is a large withdrawal, but well within your account limit. I'll process it right away. Would you like us to prepare a private room to make the transaction more convenient?" Camille's lips curved slightly. There were no suspicious questions, no contempt, only professionalism and respect. While Emily worked, Camille observed the entire lobby. Every employee was busy, but their attitude had changed. No discrimination, no selective service, no looks of disdain. A new sign hung behind the counter. Every customer deserves to be served with respect and fairness. If you ever feel you have not been treated properly, please call directly. Office of the CEO, 1800 Fairbank. Below the words was the handwritten signature of Camille Johnson herself. When the transaction was completed, Emily handed over the thick envelope of cash with both hands, her gaze steady. "Thank you for trusting Sterling Bank. If you need further assistance, I am always here." Camille accepted the envelope, her eyes quietly brimming with pride. In that moment, she saw not just an employee at work. She saw a reflection of herself as a young woman, once trembling but yearning for recognition, now mirrored in Emily, stronger, steadier, more resilient. She nodded, smiling softly. "Thank you, Emily." The name slipped out, making Emily pause. Her eyes followed the simply dressed woman walking out of the lobby. She did not know why, but a strange feeling rose in her chest, as if she had just been evaluated by the very eyes that had changed her life 6 months ago. Camille stepped out of the branch, the autumn wind brushing her face. She lifted her gaze to the glass tower gleaming in the sunlight. 6 months ago, it had been a symbol of humiliation. Today, it stood as proof of transformation. In her heart, Camille whispered, "Fairness does not come from grand speeches. It comes from every nod, every smile, every transaction each day. And once change begins, it spreads like wildfire." She turned away, blending into the bustling crowd of the city like any ordinary woman. But deep inside, Camille knew. The seed she had planted had taken root. Sterling Bank was no longer a bank for the privileged few. It was becoming a bank for all. And this story, from humiliation to revelation, from firings to rebirth, would be told for years to come as proof that fairness is not a privilege, but a right every human being deserves. In a world where prejudice can slip in, even behind gleaming counters, Camille Johnson's story reminds us that fairness is not a reward, but a fundamental right. It only takes one person brave enough to stand up, and an entire system can change. If you believe that every customer deserves respect, hit like to help spread this message. Don't forget to subscribe to follow the next stories, where truth will be revealed and justice reclaimed. And I want to hear from you. Leave a short comment with just 2 words, fairness, to remind us all that no matter who you are, you deserve to be treated equally.